Well, good morning, everyone. You always know it's a good conference when you lose your conference badge by the end of it, and I've lost mine completely. So we have, again, a very full house. I hope you can all take seats there. I'm seeing there are rooms to the side and at the front. And, once again, it's so thrilling that so many of you came to Hanover, New Hampshire to share your ideas and participate in this symposium. Today's panel, it's the fourth and final panel of the conference. And what we really wanted to do was to have a roundtable discussion that remained very sort of free and open and flexible. And we're going to try and allow plenty of times at the end for questions, because many of you have been coming up to me and saying, you know what we haven't covered yet? And you can never cover everything, but I do think that at the end, we can have that kind of discussion about what have we not yet put on the table in terms of moving our practice forward. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce the panelists who are going to be discussing these questions. So I'm going to begin with John Stomberg. In 2011, John Stomberg was appointed as the Florence Finch Abbott Director of the Mount Holyoke College Art Museum in South Hadley, Massachusetts. You can tell he brought his board with him. They're going to be cheering all the way, He was also appointed as a lecturer in art and teaches courses in the history of photography, modern contemporary art, and American art. His current research focuses on artistic collaboration and the role that teaching museums can play in fostering innovation and demonstrating leadership on campus. And that's one of the big issues that we'll be talking about today. And moving right along, we have Tina Dunkley. In 1994, Tina Dunkley became the director of the Clark Atlanta University Art Galleries in Atlanta, Georgia, where she successfully fundraised to rehouse the university's distinguished permanent collection and began a program of bringing this collection to national and international attention that culminated in 2012 with the publication of her definitive catalog, In the Eye of the Muses. And if you haven't seen this book, it's really extraordinary. So Tina, we're delighted to have you here. And then moving along, we have Jessica Nicoll. Jessica Nicoll is director and Louise Innes Doyle 34 chief curator at the Smith College Museum of Art in Northampton, Massachusetts, a position she has held since 2005. She is also the director of Smith's Museums Concentration, established in 2009, advising and instructing students in museum history, theory, and practice. Then we move to Jock Reynolds. Jock Reynolds is the Henry J. Heinz II director of the Yale University Art Gallery in New Haven, Connecticut. Since his appointment in 1998, Jock has overseen the major renovation, expansion, and reinstallation of the Yale University Art Gallery's exhibition, teaching, and collection facilities, which opened to great critical acclaim in December 2012. And finally, we have Sylvia Wolf. Sylvia Wolf joined the Henry Art Gallery in Seattle, Washington as director in April 2008. As an educator, Sylvia has taught studio art, art history, and museum studies courses at the graduate and undergraduate level for more than 15 years. And I should say, this is a very distinguished panel, and all of them share, I think, a lot of things in common. But to me, what stands out is they're all innovators in our field, they're all leaders in our field, and I felt that they would bring a wonderful dialogue together and debate. And with that, we're going to start with our first round of questions. It's going to be almost like a game show, but with no prizes. So I thought we'd begin with campus leadership, because campus leadership has been something that has been very much at the forefront in terms of teaching museums in recent years. So how can teaching museums demonstrate leadership on campus and play a role in the transformation of higher education learning? I think that's one of the biggest issues we face today. And then as well as that, I'd like the panel to think about, if we're facing the emergence of a decentralized model of higher education, how do our unique collections contribute value to place-based education? How do we cast the work of the artist and artistic innovation as a form of research, distinct but equally valuable to scientific research? And finally, how do we model the unique educational value of museums for college or university administrations? So why don't we begin with John and work down the panel with those issues?
All right, well, there's a lot to be said here. The role of leadership, first of all, I think is very important. One of the aspects that we've been looking at our museum recently is that we pretty much are doing a very good job at this point of curriculum support. Faculty come to us, we help them work with our collections to be able to become better teachers. So the next step is to think about what is the mission, and almost every educational institution here shares a mission that somehow boils down to creating individuals who go off and have engaged lives with their communities, they're productive, they're innovators in their fields. So what can museums do to help that, I think, is one of the questions that we've been dealing with. And one thought was that, well, actually, we could train creativity, add creativity training onto the kind of curriculum support that we're doing. We have this great gift in that we have objects, and objects can be used for teaching like nothing else. So as we think about the kind of increase of online education, one of the areas that museums help colleges in particular is by bringing people in and giving them an experience that's unmatched online. One of the discoveries we're making at Mount Holyoke, and I'm sure it's true for many places, is that libraries are having to seriously reconfigure themselves, and they're thinking of themselves as efficient translators of information due to the digital revolution. But in the museum, digitizing has brought more and more people in and increased the amount of attendance that we get and how many professors want to use objects. So what we can demonstrate is that we can help lead the college into the 21st century by focusing on object-based learning, which is the type of learning, the experiential learning, that will distinguish liberal arts colleges and universities from online education. That's one of the ways I think that we can offer some real leadership in taking on the 21st century head-on.
Well, certainly in the case of Clark Atlanta University, art galleries, I've had several people ask me about this institution and the collection that we represent. It is a historic collection of American art with primarily works by African American artists, and it is located at a historically Black institution. And this collection, certainly the way in which I envisioned the works being brought into the light, because they were in the basement at some point, making them more accessible, going through the whole process of, getting it rehoused and all of that. But then the challenge, of course, became how to, I thought if you built the museum or the galleries, they would come. And apparently that wasn't quite true, and that became a huge challenge in our case. And so what I really started with was, I think I reverted to some of my my bringing up my mother, which was, she was kind of a tiger mother, or a leopard mother, as someone said. Okay, well then let's just make a requirement. So we moved from essentially, I was sort of waiting and trying to, create all these exhibitions that would, capture their attention. And then we moved into, no, I think we're going to have to make this a little bit more formal. So approaching the administration, making a case for integrating the collection into the academic curriculum. And there was a task force established and all that. And what came out of that was that now all freshmen are required to come into the galleries. But still, one has this challenge of, well, do you really want them coming in under duress as such? But we have a record. We have a record that and it's a thick record, that says I was made to come here as a result of an assignment. I was forced, and I really didn't want to come, but now that I'm here, this is really an incredible place. I'm going to bring my aunt, my uncles, my girlfriends. We're going to get married here. So there's something to say for the leopard effect, you know, of forcing people into it. But by the same token, having been introduced through to Conserve a Legacy with Jock, Reynolds, and Rick Powell, and met Pam. Well, this was after the fact, but still Pam Franks came in. We did launch a program in which we started really reaching out to our faculty. So we've been in that process for a while. I don't know if I answered that question. I don't want to ramble too long. But the leadership seems to have emanated from my office. And we had a really strong response from the administration at that time. But the challenge has been, as administrations move on, then you still have to address those same issues. But the faculty members are still there, and they're still doing things, using the gallery in a certain way. So that's, yeah.
So thinking about this question of leadership, some ideas that have come up over the last 2 days that seem to point in a profitable direction for the future is the conversations that we've been having about the goals of interdisciplinarity in museums, but also the challenge in actually achieving truly cross-disciplinary thought and collaboration. And the notion that museums are uniquely effective, as I've heard the term a lot this weekend, bridging spaces, spaces that bring people together in conversation. And I think there's a lot of untapped potential there. There's some obstacles in figuring out how to make it work and how to nurture a kind of organic conversation with scholars across our academic communities. But I think museums are spaces that can really do that very productively, and we've certainly seen some great examples of that, and particularly at the Tang with their focus on interdisciplinary collaboration for generating their programming. So that seems to me to be an area that's worth developing. It's something that we think a lot about at the museum, and just wanted to point to one very modest example, but something that's been productive in changing the way we've been working, which is trying to figure out also to have more generative conversations, not necessarily to have us be in the lead and suggesting an idea, but to engaging faculty in conversations so that we can have ideas grow fruitfully out of that. And we've formed a new partnership with the Conn Liberal Arts Institute on the campus of Smith College, which was also conceived with the goal of getting faculty talking to each other and trying to break down and entrench disciplinary boundaries. We've started an annual project where we put together a mini colloquium with a group of usually 12 to 15 faculty from many different disciplines, and we spend a couple of days just looking at one work of art in the collection and engaging in really deep, probing conversation about that, and it's proved very productive for just engaging faculty at their level around our collection and having them open up new ways of thinking about the collection, and also helping us imagine new ways of bringing people together to develop projects around our collection. And it's still, we've only done this program for 2 years, so it's young and it's not quite clear what it will generate, but I think it's been a good model. And I want to acknowledge Maggie Lind, who's a member of our education staff and is here, proud graduate of Dartmouth College, and somebody who played a formative role in developing that program. And then the other thing that, the question that you asked about artistic practice as a legitimate form of research prompted another thought, which is the other thing that seems very unique about our situations is that we exist in these scholarly communities. There are people with just unbelievable knowledge around us and research interests. And I think that there's incredible potential for research based in museums about how learning happens in those spaces that could enrich the field. I also think that there's probably potential for thinking about how we bring artists into conversations with those communities to sort of open things up. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but it strikes me as intriguing to think about how you could bring a visiting artist, a resident artist into a museum and open up the resources of the college or university to them in ways that might be very productive for everybody.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Well, there have been so many interesting things have come up in these last 2 days, but I wanted to address your first question by remarking on some things that were said by two people that really struck me. One was last night the remarks of your provost who addressed us at dinner, and the other was some remarks by David Helfand, the tutor and the founder of Quest University. And one thing, and it goes to the very nature of, what our institutions are, what they are is teaching places, whether they're colleges or universities. I think we often forget that a huge number of the students who come our way and faculty members come our way have succeeded in this tremendous, training of their mathematical skills, their verbal skills, all these, their scientific skills. But how many of them have ever been tested in terms of their visual intelligence? What we heard from him last night as a linguist was the value of finally engaging some of the exhibitions at the Hood and how they had all of a sudden had him think differently about his own subject matter, even the relationship of language to, the two exhibitions he spoke of. And David Heflin spoke a lot about how people actually learn and find their way in the world. And I have to say, I think an awful lot of the students who come our way, and that's not true of all of them, and certainly a place like Yale where there's this tradition of strong studio practice, many students select Yale because of their interest in the arts, but a tremendous amount of students who've gotten to places like those we work and teach at have never really had their visual intelligence really encouraged as a part of what it's going to take to get into one of these schools. So I think a lot of the people who come and study, or a lot of people who teach with us, for some degree, that's a little bit terra incognita. In some cases, they're a bit anxious or even afraid of it. So a huge part of what we need to do with these great collections we have is to entrust to them the experience of engaging them is not going to be a fearful or unfriendly situation, but one in which we can genuinely link other kinds of knowledge they have together to a richness of their intellectual intelligence, because God knows we're all navigating the world with our eyes. How do you start to make some judgments of how this can work into your curriculum, some of the choices you're making as a teacher or student? And that's why I think this particular field has become so exciting, as we've taken on that aspect that we're going to engage the curriculum not only with students but with faculty members. And of course that takes many of you in the room who are knowledgeable across just disciplines beyond, being in the visual world. You too are having to learn and approach these people with a sense that both of these communities of people, faculty members, museum people, and students are learning together. And I think that speaks the kind of collaborative nature of what many of us are doing in our own institutions and colleges, but also bespeaks the fact that we're reaching out to each other, wanting to form partnerships and best practices, relationships between us, and that there's something to me very exciting about that kind of sharing, because clearly this is gaining a kind of momentum. And I think it's also, we're at an important point in the juncture of how museums are behaving, whether it's the Civic Museum or the University or College Museum. Just think about it. Most of those big city museums, and our dear friends, many of them run them, are having to monetize the bejesus out of their collection. They're charging $25 for this. They're pumping money out of their museum shops and all these other kinds of things they're having to pay attention to. Most of us are able to share what it is we do freely because of the nature of our educational enterprise. And I think that too is a great advantage as we go forward, and that many of us have underestimated the interest our own alumni and supporters have in making sure that true access to these collections, which are full of genuine treasures, are made more freely available to all comers. Because again, people who graduate from Dartmouth or Yale, they don't spend the rest of their life, all of them, living in Hanover or New Haven. They go off and become leaders in communities all over the country and the world. And what they do themselves is face these broader issues of how these great civic and other collections are being shared elsewhere. And I think we kind of set the pattern right now for a greater sense of generosity of how this stuff can permeate the culture in a culture that's becoming more and more divided economically, and I think in a genuine potential threat to the kind of democracy we hold dear.
Great. Sylvia.
It's interesting because at the Henry Art Gallery is situated on the University of Washington campus, which is a state university. And it's also one of the great research institutions for computer science, for engineering, for mathematics. one of the great challenges that we have is in helping the administration. We have no problem engaging faculty across campus. We engage with 20 academic units, 10 non-academic units, much to the credit of the staff that reaches out to do so. Our challenge is to help the administration understand that artistic thinking is a form of research in its own right. And if you think about the fact that science is engaged in proving, it's engaged in proving theories, it's engaged in developing and substantiating fact, whereas artistic inquiry is about asking questions. It's about challenging assumptions. It's being about being open to uncertain outcome. So therein lies the challenge of using the word research and laboratory. I know we're tired of it, but I'll tell you, it certainly works on our campus. Although we call the Henry, we don't call it a teaching organization, we call it a learning organization, because that breaks down the idea that there are those who have the knowledge and those who don't. We're all learning together. We talk about it as a test site as well as a laboratory where we try things out, and therein lies the engagement with uncertain outcome. But what I'm resonating with what my colleagues are saying is we also have another unique opportunity. The statistics for the University of Washington are staggering. 33% of incoming freshmen are first in their family to go to college. That's a high percentage. And I'm assuming that if they're first in their family to go to college, they haven't had a lot of museum experience. Maybe that's a bias on my part. But then if you fast forward to the graduate students, that's the entire graduating class, 72% of those stay in the Puget Sound region and raise their families. They may go to graduate school elsewhere, the military, but they come back. And that tells me that if we can engage them, if we can do what Tina's done, which we're trying, and to make it mandatory, part of freshman orientation for students to get in to us at the beginning of their career, imagine how we might have an impact on the visual literacy of the region for generations to come. Which brings me to the point that I want to finish up this question with, and that is to think short term, trying to figure out how to engage with getting the freshman orientation, but then long term, talking to the administration and to the legislature and to our civic leaders about that long-term vision. Because one of the things that struck me about what I've heard is there's so much variety of how teaching museums and university and college museums function, whether they're the museum of their region or they're in a region with multiple museums. Each one of us has to figure out what is our relationship to the mission of the host institution, how do we make our case, and how do we establish our validity through fact, and then how do we stand up and talk about it as much as possible to as many people as possible. We get in front of the Board of Regents with students as often as we can, and that's maybe once every 3 years.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I think that final point is very well taken, and you know, John, you've published 4 essays on campus leadership. I call them the Stomberg Quartet, and I think that publishing and showing, you know, because all of them are based in research and facts, the more we demonstrate that to the leadership, the more they'll realize what a resource we are and propel us forward. I want to shift now to another topic, which is metrics. And how do teaching museums measure success and their educational impact? How do we, what criteria do we use? We heard from Jock about visual intelligence. Other people like Sylvia use the term visual literacy, but this is something that's come up again and again. So how do we go beyond things like attendance and other standard metrics that are often used by civic museums to, you know, the success of a show at my former museum, which was the Philadelphia Museum of Art, was always the number of people who came to see it. It was never about the impact of those visits and what they learned and how it transformed their lives. How can we better track those graduates who have gone on to pursue careers in museums and the arts? And that was something that Tina raised with me. And how can we contribute to making our students innovative thinkers through active engagement with art? How do we get involved with teaching at the level so that our faculty think of us as more than just curriculum support. So metrics, let's turn that over to John.
I was hoping you'd ask me the last question, not the first question. I can't take a dodge on metrics. Well, metrics is really hard. First of all, if we had a way of evaluating the transformation that happens in people's lives when they engage with art, it would be really fantastic. I don't know what it is yet, but we are working on it. Right now we're working on anecdotal evidence. We gather a lot of statements, and in terms of numbers, it was really great for me to start realizing that we don't have to have 60,000 people come through the gallery. That's just not our goal. Our goal is to have a real impact on a smaller group of people, to take a smaller group and actually change their lives. And we often say in this field that great art changes lives, and it's true. So the trick is, what is the engagement with that great art, and how do we then realize that it changes lives? Well, so far we just have students who write back, and sometimes it's 2 or 3 years later, and you get these incredible letters, and they say, you know, believe it or not, I'm now working for this firm in downtown Cleveland, and my time in the museum came back to me, and I had an idea, and it's really rewarding. So in terms of the metrics, we haven't figured out exactly how to count that. I know the people at Oberlin are working on a way of asking survey kind of questions. Did you understand this before class? How did class change that? What were the 3 or 4 new ideas you had during the class? This kind of research. I think all of us are eager to see how that works, and if it works, I think a lot of us will be applying those ideas. But you're right, you know, most of us work for fairly small institutions, but if you take 50 people at a time, 30 people at a time, actually 10 people at a time, and have a very intense experience, then other institutions can have the kind of quick and somewhat, not necessarily shallow, but somewhat more shallow experience of kind of parading through a museum. You know, one of the things that all of us do is slow looking, one object, you know, 4 objects. Take 10 students, 4 objects in 2 hours. And it's an entirely different experience. And the object begins to open up, the conversations begin to open up, the experience changes. And the other thing we have is photographs. We have one of my favorite photographs is a young woman holding an antique coin. And to this day, I don't know what she's doing, but she's looking at this coin and she's like, and it's an amazing photograph, and it speaks volumes to me because she's just had an epiphany holding this ancient Roman coin. I can't figure out how to measure that yet.
Right. But you will.
We will. We're working on it.
Tina?
I take it for granted, and because I've witnessed, like John, very anecdotally, but they're very powerful illustrations. I don't know how we would go forward to construct a way of doing it, but it's clearly, I think we would have to define what the outcomes, what kind of outcomes are we looking for, and sort of work through that. You know, but in terms of my focus, I mean, and I've thought about it on numerous occasions, but then just handling all of what I do have to handle, you know, I accept the idea of when students who are in my class, it was a visual arts appreciation class or what have you, and they were all not wanting to be in there. I made them confess to that. They were, you know, hands up. And they were, no. I said, yeah, tell the truth. You know, I said, I want to hear the truth. And all of their hands went up. It was Morehouse and Spelman students. And I told them, I said, you know, I believe that by the time this class is over, well, even beyond that, you're going to find, you know, that art is really relevant in your lives. Well, 2 things happened. 1, 2 students applied to medical school, and they, in fact, came back and told me that they were given an original piece of art to explicate, and they were absolutely excited that they had the information from the class, because what they were really measuring was their ability to observe and record. And then I've had numerous situations relative to students years later calling back So, I mean, how do you measure that? I don't know, but we can just keep some major records, but we know that it works. And I also want to say one other thing. The the president of Hampton University, I was surprised to find out, because they have a leading collection among the HBCUs, as they started collecting in 1872. But Harvey is a student of David Driscoll, the art historian, and he studied with him when he was at Talladega. So he was really oriented in a way that this man has given from his own coffers, to the collection. So yeah, I think there's a causal relationship, but again, I'm going to pass it on to Jessica. I'm sure she must have it.
Yeah, so I also don't have a great answer, but because it's hard, as I think you said in framing the question, it's hard to think about how to gather data in a way that actually does illustrate the impact that you're having, and quantitative numbers aren't often as satisfying as the qualitative stories. That said, we've done some thinking about how we could be a little bit more systematic in quantitative analysis, and starting with an analysis of alumni identity, and worked on a project with the Alumni Association where we were astonished to find that 10% of the Smith alumni body that report out, which is only a portion of the overall, identify themselves as being involved with the visual arts in some significant way in their lives, whether that's as a working curator or educator or museum trustee or working artist. And that's been actually an important bit of data to share with the administration and remind them how central the arts are to education at Smith, and have been, a founding value of the college, and that just suffuses the college's legacy and its current work. And so that's been an important connection to make, and it's led to the college being willing to integrate the museum into its institutional research gathering efforts. And so we're now formally part of the surveying that the college does with students and with alumni to get information about people's history of engagement with the museum. Again, it's numerical information, but it's been useful, and it's been, I think the school and we were sort of stunned in the first year of this data gathering to find that 95% of all students say they visited the museum at least once in their time at Smith, and a very high statistic, more than 50% said that they visited multiple times every year. So that, I think, was powerful too. But the qualitative stories are the ones that are so compelling, and those are much more, it's much harder to be systematic about how you gather them. And one of the things that's really struck me in my work and in traveling and talking with graduates of the college is how much everybody, when they meet me, whatever they do, say, oh my gosh, do you still have the Kirchner, oh, is the Aikens painting on view? They all have a work of art that they remember and that they connect with. And so I've been thinking a lot about that, because initially I thought that was charming, and now it started to seem more significant to me, that remains a point of contact for them and point of identity. They talk about them as old friends, and we are getting ready to welcome a new president this summer, and so in preparation for that, we've wanted to do a project that would share those stories with her, that would reveal that history. And so we've just launched a new project that's inviting members of our community, anybody who defines themselves as a member of our community, to share a story with us about a significant connection with a work of art. And it's catalyzed by this project to welcome President McCartney in the fall, but it's also feedback that we're hoping will be formative as we think about a reinstallation of our collection, and give us a deeper insight into how people engage with that collection. So
I couldn't agree with Jessica more about identifying, students' interest not only while they're with the institution, but later on in life. Both Sylvia and I went to a prep school called Andover, which happened to have a great teaching museum on its campus, the Addison Gallery of American Art. And at a young age, we were engaged with photography and basically a Bauhaus course that was based on what Joseph Albers and others had done in Germany, and had extraordinary experiences while still in high school, and had available a truly remarkable collection of American art. And frankly, when I went to that prep school, what I was most interested in and good at was biology. I was interested in observing the world of plants and animals. I loved it. My scholarship job was maintaining the greenhouse and the animal room. And when I'd go to the Oliver Wendell Holmes library. This was reminding me of Heflin, where it was all boys still then, and they were grinding it out at these tables with their lamps and reading, and I just couldn't hack it. I wandered over to the Addison one day and started to sit on the couches and look at these Homers and Aikens paintings, and these things talk to you. I think we keep forgetting things like music and visual art. They go right into you. They don't go into you through verbal. You then talk about them later, but the experience of music and visual art comes into you a different way. So as much as these quantitative kind of measures are, how many people are teaching, how many people are coming, that's all interesting, but what happens to you in these places, the stories that are told are important. And so in my case, if the people had not gone out around the 50th anniversary of the Addison Gallery and identified a bunch of us who'd been students and said, did the art program in the Addison Gallery have any influence in your life? I never would have gone back to Andover again in my whole life. I frankly didn't like a lot of the education I received there, and I went to UC Santa Cruz when it just opened with 600 students in the kind of situation David Heflin, described yesterday, where it was pass-fail. We lived with the faculty in trailers the first year. We made it all up interdisciplinarily as we went along with block classes and faculty comments. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven in college. So the only way I would have ever reconnected with Andover, never could imagine I'd end up running the Addison Gallery, was to come back to some degree and be able to contribute. And I know, a lot of us have felt that way about contributing back. I mean, this is the first Smith alumna to run her institution, and how wonderful to be able to give back, that way. So I think these affinity groups were forming particularly out of the students and faculty who are engaged with us now as we expand this field, to maintain relationships with those people, not just sort of catch can around a 50th anniversary of a museum, but in an ongoing way is important. Now, Ellen Albert, where are you? You're out there in the audience. So there she is. I'm going to confess this again, as I always do. The idea of starting the undergraduate gallery guide program at Yale was basically an idea hatched at Smith College, brought to us by a Mount Holyoke graduate who worked at Smith and then came and in 1998 said, I'd like to start this little program, and they've got 8 students who want to do it. And would you give some funding if we want to do this? Well, absolutely. Let's try it out. Well, this thing is a huge success. There are 42 students in it now. There's a giant waiting list. It's at the British Art Center and with us. And we had a 10-year anniversary of those students. And we've now had 3 different young people direct that program, every one of which is fantastic. Ellen's gone on to be now the Mellon, curator of academic affairs back at her alma mater, contributing back to her school. This is a cycle of giving back and learning that's so exciting, and that group and the maintenance of that group is, to us, one of the most important groups that we see future leadership and ultimately future patronage and benefaction coming back to the institution. And it's actually something that was just talked about at our president's, deans, and directors meeting at Yale last week, the sense that the traditional appeal to just sort of a stereotyped Yale man or woman is not enough, or the typical, Andover man or woman graduate. You want to really identify and maintain relationships around people's real interests in life, and you're going to have a lot more re-engagement with institutions if you do that well. So I think it behooves us to invest time, money, resource to do that. And look at here, we got the Mount Holyoke Advisory Board right here, sitting front and center. A whole bus of them came to check this out. So we know this translates. Stomberg's a genius here, and Michael's a genius, and Jessica brought her class over here, right? So I mean, we're involving the key constituents of our whole institutions: our faculty members, our students, our dedicated graduates and alums. It's a whole cycle of life, right? And everyone who's had a good experience at one of these places wants to make sure it's even better for those who come next. And we love to come back and see how it is now, right? And remember it in terms of our time, but hopefully we're making it even more exciting for the next generations.
So I have to quote our new favorite expression, it's an ecosystem of ownership.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm writing.
Clearly, being inspirational, like Jock is and everyone around this table is a critical piece of the work that we do. None of us have a measuring stick that works for all. I find, again, I'm being in a research university where I'm constantly beating the drum and realizing that I can beat the drum in an evangelical way about what I believe, and what I believe is that exposure to original works of art inspires original thinking, and original thinking is the only thing that's advanced civilization over time, consistently. Think back to Leonardo da Vinci. That's all well and good, but then I also try and put in my kit of parts statistics that we're finding from the IMLS, Institute of Museum and Library Services, or from the NEA. For example, the IMLS in a 2009 report identified the key 21st century skills as problem solving and critical thinking, entrepreneurship, and creativity. Well, where do you develop those skills? In the arts, in the humanities. Then you go to an NEA report from last year, and last spring, that students, and this report is about at-risk youth, but again, I'll take any statistics and sort of move them into whatever use category I can. And at-risk youth are proven when they have exposure to the arts in their high school years to be 40% more, 40% less willing to engage in racist behavior or tolerate racist behavior. They are 31% more likely to choose a major that aligns with a professional career. They have a better record academically overall. They are more likely to show civic-minded behavior, including higher levels of volunteering. These are reports. And I take these reports and I put these facts in with the inspirational and the aspirational language that we try to use. That said, I was just thinking, we all talk about membership, we have membership organizations. We have student members, a lot of them, and students can be free, so for them to pay $20 to get privileged access to the information that we are putting out online or to come into special events, we don't have an alumni membership. Do we just assume that they go on and become individual or family members? If it's a culture of ownership, wouldn't having an alumni membership make people feel special? I don't know. Just a thought.
Thank you. One of the things we did recently at the Hood was in our history, we've had more than 150 interns. And so we offered them all, we tracked them down, we offered them all free membership if they would answer 4 very simple questions about their time at the museum and how it impacted their careers and where they were now. And it just gave us invaluable data. And I think what we've learned from this set of questions is that we don't have the metrics yet, but we're all thinking about that, because if we can show how we're making this impact, everything will fall from there. And you know, it's amazing to see how far we have come in that regard.
Michael, could I just add one
Sure.
thing? One of the things we've actually just decided to do at the Yale Art Gallery is go to an entirely free membership.
Yeah.
And it may sound counterintuitive in some regard, but we looked into how much we actually spend to maintain a membership where people pay a certain amount, and said, well, why are people actually wanting to join as a member of the Yale Art Gallery? They're really only joining because, you know, all they get, what is like 10% off of buying our books or something? They're already getting in free. So you're asking, well, why not just let them self-select to say they want to freely become members, and then treat it a little more like public radio, where you say, if you appreciate what's going on here, we write you a letter a couple times a year. We don't hold the whole pledge drives where we, you know, do that type of thing. But we can maybe communicate on a couple points in the year and simply say, these are some of the things that are going on. If you care about it and want to support it, you know, join in and let people self-select. We don't often, you know, you had talked about the whole mini-met, you know, model. Are we trying to, imitate these things? Why do we maintain certain kinds of memberships, gift shops, et cetera, if they aren't truly mission-centric and don't produce a cost-benefit when we analyze it that's truly supportive of the mission at large? We've taken to questioning things like that on a kind of perpetual basis as a self-look at our program, and in some cases just, you know, not doing certain things that way anymore. And the same is true, I think, a number of us, we talked about this morning informally over breakfast, for all the non-copyrighted imagery we hold in our institutions. Why aren't we just sharing that freely? We share books freely. I mean, why do we maintain rights and reproductions departments that cost us a whole lot of time and money to maintain, when there are ways to basically get that out of the system and concentrate entirely on our teaching mission, our learning mission, and our collection mission? I'd love to have more discussion amongst all of us as to how some of these experiments we're doing may be affecting, how we do or don't make choices such as this. I'd love to know more from all of you in that regard and share that with each other as colleagues.
We're going to leave plenty of room for discussion at the end. I think you're absolutely right, though, that our membership programs and many other aspects of our museums do reflect that initial impetus to mirror on a smaller scale the larger civic museums. And as many of you know, in a recent Crest Foundation report on academic museums, the recommendation was made to close museum shops in teaching museums and make them classrooms. And when I first read that, I kind of came back to that idea that you're talking about, which is it's about where your mission is right now. And if you are a teaching museum, and a lot of these shops don't make money, we know that if you're losing money to maintain a shop that could be used for educational purposes, I thought that was a very provocative statement. We're going to move on now to another section which deals with audience and participation. So how can teaching museums thrive in an age of participation where students and other visitors want more autonomy and control over their cultural experiences? Who do we need to be relevant to, and how do we do so? And that was a very wonderful statement that Sylvia posed. I'll read that again. Who do we need to be relevant to, and how do we do so? And finally, what are the challenges and opportunities for teaching museums in the digital age?
Okay. The great thing I think is truly the digital age is an incredible opportunity for us. All of us are discovering that the more we take pictures of things and put them online, the more people want to come in and experience them firsthand. And for us, it's been a great opportunity to look through the collections and to think about what is the core value that we bring to people, and it's experience. And so in the digital age, you have a mediated experience, which is in fact a wonderful experience. It's a profound experience, but it is totally different from actually being with it. I cried, I wept, I had an incredible day, September 11th, 2001. I was in Boston. But it was an emotional, incredible day, thoroughly mediated for me. It was certainly different for people who were there. And that's a huge example of what goes on in a museum. To see a photograph of a Syrian relief is one thing, but to come in and see that Syrian relief and to experience it and to think about it is another. So to me, the digital age is an immense opportunity for art museums, and also the incursions that digital experience are making into higher education is also a great opportunity for museums. The more college education becomes digitally mediated, the more colleges are relying on the museum to help them counter that. And you can use that in any way you think of, whether you're talking about watching a lecture online or having to do your homework online, listen to the lecture, and then come in and do something concrete. We talk about flipped teaching, where instead of reading a book at home and then coming in for a lecture, you get the book down, you download the lecture at home, and you come in and you do something experiential. And engaging with art is that experience. So I think that the objects themselves speak very well for our future. And the other opportunity, I think, that museums offer, and this cycles back a little bit to leadership, is that by having these objects, we will be turned to ever more over the next century for a kind of education of the real that is going to be not a kind of sentimental throwback to the past, but an essential part of creating a whole person for the future.
This is a little tricky for me, part of this question in terms of the digital age, because I recognize how important it is. First, I wanted to, First I wanted to respond to, I think we really need to be, certainly in our case, in our institution, we need to really be relevant to the entire community in addition to our students. and faculty, and that really is because certainly when we go out for, looking for funds and support, it is always a major issue in terms of, particularly at a private institution, that we're able to demonstrate that we are doing programs that actually reach out. So that's always an interesting balance act for us, and I've been able to deal with that in terms of bringing artists in from the community and just having those bridges connected through recordings and using that within the institution and our students engaging directly with the artists. But then there's another question relative to the digital age, because we have a webcam that we use to record people's responses there, and that we actually air. But I always have a little problem. I don't know if you all can help me with this, and it's probably a light one, but the whole idea of becoming visually literate to me is really based on the actual object. To me, I mean, you have this interface on with these objects that you have in your system, and they do assist in the assignments or what have you. But I'm finding that there are people that's like, but you can't read that object the same way. And it doesn't give you the same kind of information. And as an artist, I dare say that I produce works that I don't care how well I take those photographs, there are certain works that I do that cannot be read. They can only be read properly by the naked eye. So I always, sometimes I encounter students who are asking me certain things about pictures and images, and they're sort of off to the left or to the right about what's really happening in that image. So I just want to throw that out there. I realize it's an important part of what it is we're doing in terms of getting the message out there, but I also think that there's a catch-22 in that as well.
So I want to speak not to the digital question, but just to this notion of how do we thrive in an age of participation. And I found the conversation yesterday so provocative and productive in helping us think about what the contours of that look like and how it supports the development of 21st century skills and all of that. But interestingly, one of the things that it made me start thinking about is that there's a very traditional thing that's embedded in most of our museums, if not all of them, that actually does support that. And so I wanted to kind of call out and celebrate a part of the function of academic museums that it's just a piece of our infrastructure, but I actually think it has real potential to model for us a way to develop that dimension of our museums going forward, and it's the place of study centers within our museums. We have a Works on Paper study center at Smith where 2/3 of our collection is housed, 16,000 objects, and all of it is available for anybody to come see with a phone call or an email. And we have a teaching gallery where faculty can call work out on view for display. It's not a curated space, it's just a space where art's made available for their interaction with their students. And then we all have classrooms where we're pulling art like that. And Project Zero at Harvard recently did a really good project with the Harvard Art Museums as part of their planning for their renovation, looking at the role of their study centers within the operations of the museum. And it identified that they play they have a very distinctive value because they allow people to encounter a much broader range of works, to identify works that are central to their own interests, to make comparisons that they might not be able to make within the galleries, to engage with issues of interpretation. So a lot of the things that we were talking about happen on a daily and informal basis in these spaces. And it just struck me, I mean, a lot of the work of these kinds of spaces was implicit in many of the presentations yesterday, but I just wanted to call them out as something that I think is distinctive. When you ask the question, what's the ideal learning environment? I think that's a distinctive part of what makes us ideal learning environments, and they are there to a large degree already, and I think are ripe for development.
Yeah, I don't want to dwell too much on the digital, other than to say that I think a challenge that faced most of us at some point in time, and it was certainly true at Yale, was how do people know what they want to use if you can't even provide an image of what you have in your collection? And I'll just give you a quick background of by 1997 at Yale, there were only 1,500 works photographed out of the whole collection. And the library systems at Yale had for many years already been fully computerized. The Dewey Decimal Cards catalogs in the Sterling Library were basically abandoned, and students were looking everything up on computers as to which books to take out, and there were remote shelving libraries, bringing the books in by 24 hours notice for students and faculty. But at the art gallery at that time, the whole collection was kept on typewritten 4x5 cards. And they were, and it was like truckers. They had 2 sets of books when I got there. The curators kept 1 set of books and the registrars kept another set. And they didn't necessarily trust one another. And another issue you had was that if you couldn't actually find that curator at any point in time, you had no way of knowing whether what was in the collection or what you could get out or borrow. And so, many of us have gone on to form departments of digital photography. We now have 135,000 images online at Yale. But don't forget that the minute you do that, you have to also provide with that the kinds of spaces and programs. And more importantly, you have to buck up and really staff these places so that you've got art handlers and registrars and postdocs or interns, and I think importantly, you want your own curators to also take leadership roles in being great exemplars of using this material with students and faculty. And then most importantly at all, we've seen it here with the wonderful breakout tours and your students, your student who was presenting yesterday. We want to give our own students a chance to work directly with these objects and exhibitions. And you'd asked the question, I think, Michael, part of the first thing is what kind of collection curators would we want to have in the future, too, as a part of something we might talk about today. And I think most of us should not be hiring collection curators who aren't also deeply interested in students and teaching, and they should be well married into those of you who have now become these curators of academic affairs. And believe me, I will not hire anyone to work at the Yale Art Gallery who isn't confident enough in their own professional scholarship and ability to think that they can't also step out of the way to let a student have an experience of primary importance. We're here first to serve the students and faculty. If you want to have a career that's entirely about the art world another way, go work at MoMA, the Whitney, the Met, all these great civic institutions, which are terrific, but be clear about the identity and mission of our different institutions, and take pleasure in knowing that if we train people well, they're the very people who are going to, not only to work in our own institutions, but will improve the cultural climate of some of the big city museums that frankly could use a little more generosity in terms of how young people work in some of them compared to how, and some of you out there know what I'm talking about, who've interned at some of those institutions, right?
Michael, you were asking how can teaching museums thrive in an age of participation where students and other visitors want more autonomy and control over their cultural experiences. It reminds me, again, I'm going to be the stat gal here today, of a couple of more statistics here. That we know now that the younger generation is spending well over 23, 24 hours a week on video games. And that video gaming alone, computer gaming, has long outsold movie and record sales combined. So there's a digital component to the culture in which we're engaging that we have to be aware of. We know that a typical American in an urban or semi-urban environment is exposed to roughly 3,000 to 5,000 visual images or advertising and marketing images a day. So this is the visual world we're in. We also know that all of us can gain access to whatever we want at almost any time of day or night, shopping and otherwise. So this idea that that we're used to a degree of visual stimulus, we're used to a saturation of images, and we're used to access and control over access is part of our culture. How does that translate into the university sector? In our case, we are the only museum that has a study center, and our study center, unlike larger museums, is adjacent to our storage of 25,000 objects, so you can pull a photograph, you can pull a textile, you can pull a painting and see them together. And early on, when I first got there 5 years ago, we had gotten a grant before I got there to digitize the collection, and now I think 23 of those 25,000 objects have been digitized. not so that you can use them in a PowerPoint presentation, but so that you can see what's in the collection so you can make an appointment to come see the original. So in other words, digitization, and I never get that word right, acts as a portal to the collection so that you can come and see the original. I find that the issue of the original is really, really important. And the marketing specialist, Bill Breen, says that what people need and want today more than anything else is authenticity. And what does authenticity mean? Well, authenticity means some experience on site of something real, something that they can relate to, something that's given to them with that holds some inherent value and that's presented with integrity. That's a description of what we do. So I think the idea of utilizing, knowing what the impact of digitization, yes, has on the digital era has on our culture, and then also knowing how to use it as a tool at the service of the work that we do is critical.
I just have a
Sure.
tiny and possibly irrelevant anecdote, but as you were saying that, it made me think, we also are completing a project to capture an image of every object in our collection with the goal of opening up access to the collection, but it's also opened up access for the staff, because one of the things that it's allowed us to do is visually recognize that we have, in some instances, multiple images of a work of art or multiple examples of a work of art in our collection that came in over the course of 100-odd years and were cataloged under different names. But it was only when we got the complete visual record that we were like, oh, look at that. Here are, different states of the same print that we didn't even realize we had, which is a slightly sad admission, but I guess these are transformative technologies internally as well as externally.
And if I wanted to add an anecdote to Sylvia's thing. Art history professor at Spelman, because this really, to me, gets into the idea of really controlling the assignments when it comes to the visual literacy aspect of it. Because they come into our galleries and they're given an assignment. At the time, we really weren't aware of what the assignment was. So they were supposed to be standing in front of a painting and writing. But what they did was they tapped my assistant to get the digital version of it, take the digital version and do the report that way. And it only came up in the interaction that we noted. And she said, oh no, I didn't want them to do that. I wanted them to stand in front of the painting. So just, again, I was just trying to cite, it's something to me that I think we have to navigate very carefully. But it's got to happen. It's happening.
Now you got it going. I was going to say, no,
Suddenly we're on fire.
the difference between the digital and the original is fascinating, and I agree wholeheartedly. The digital is a portal, it's a way, it's an advertisement, it's a way to get people in to see the real. And one of our professors did this great assignment where she had her students look at the difference between the digital and the real in front, and they have to stand there and they have to try and color match. Which is really very hard. Right. And they learned so much about the real and the digital and so forth and so on. And by the way, it turns out to be wicked hard.
It is.
To really actually match that digital image on their computer doing Photoshop. Anyhow, it was one of those projects that all of us were like, wow, that was brilliant.
And I think that Sylvia's point about authenticity really, I think, does answer Tina's anxiety, because, we've all been in that situation where a student says, is that the real thing? There's this disbelief that is the real thing that they've seen online. So I actually think in the digital age, we are the kings. We offer that authentic experience, the real work of art right in front of you. It's yours, and we're free and we're open for everyone. So we've got this kind of wonderful mandate to make those experiences happen. So moving on, I want to return to this idea of the ideal learning environment. So how do we create the teaching museum of the future? What does it look like, and how does it function? And going back to John's point about flipped teaching methodology, should we be thinking about teaching taking place in our galleries? Should it take place in our classrooms? Should it take place everywhere? So if we come to the conclusion of everywhere, what do we need to have in our museums to make that possible? one of the things we talk about a lot is not just the need for classrooms, but actually also effective art storage and delivery so that we can bring those works in close proximity for teaching. And finally, and this is a tricky one, so now that our missions have been so clearly defined, we are teaching museums. We're not museums that teach, and we know that the staggering difference between those concepts. What is our relationship to the larger museum field? John Stomberg.
Remind me to sit at that end next time.
Check the order. Send it down.
You're in the hot seat, aren't you?
Check the order. They start looking.
Let me answer the last question first, because that's one of the things that we think about. I think that we have a real role in terms of the whole museum field. First of all, to get it right, but in a lot of ways, we're right on the front lines of thinking about 21st century engagements with art. The idea that it's not for the few, or that it's something one needs to know before entering a museum, that it's a place you should enter freely without any pressure and expect an engagement. You know, maybe this idea of a museum as a place to kind of turn off and chill out isn't the right idea. Maybe a museum is a place you go to turn on and get excited and think new thoughts and have engagements. And one of the great luxuries that teaching museums have is that we can pretty much count on the majority of our visitors going there for a somewhat structured experience. They're going to be at least with one other person. You know, it happens a lot that now that it's digitized, the faculty member and the student are sitting in office hours, and the faculty member is asked, you know, what could I do about the Civil War? And they call up something together and they say, oh, there's this painting on the museum. They run down the museum together. I'm exaggerating a bit, but they run down the museum together, and together they have a conversation in front of a work of art. And ultimately, that's what we're really about, is that conversation in front of a work of art. It's not necessarily the single person walking through and passively looking, but actually actively engaging with art that we're about. And I think that's a lesson that is beginning to spread out beyond the teaching art field, the teaching museum field. I was just in Houston and noticed that Houston Museum of Fine Arts now has a teaching with art division, which is aimed at just this sort of thing. And it's an interesting group. It's registrars, curators, educators, all kind of working together. But on their website, you can see it, and I talked to some of those people. So in terms of the field, I think that's one thing we have to offer, is this idea that looking at art isn't passive, it's active, it's an active engagement. And then in terms of what is the ideal learning environment, there's a lot of them. And I think what we need to be is ultimately flexible. Sometimes it's standing outside and looking at a sculpture. Sometimes, there's something really amazing, I know, for our faculty about requesting 15 works of art and 10 students and the professor and maybe, our Ellen, our coordinator of academic affairs, are all in this room together. The door gets closed and it's no longer their own classroom. And something special happens when you're no longer in your own classroom. People free up. Those who don't speak start speaking. And it's no longer a situation where to speak your mind is to take a risk that's uncomfortable. It's still taking a risk, but it's taking a comfortable risk. And professor after professor, and everybody in this room can tell you this, will tell you that their experience in the museum are some of the most rewarding they've ever had. They get to conversations that they couldn't imagine having achieved in their own classroom. I was at a social function recently with the professor of chemistry at Skidmore, and you guys had done that show, Molecules That Matter. And this guy had a couple glasses of wine, but he was like, that changed my life. I teach differently now. This guy was just converted. It was astounding. And he said it wasn't just him, it was his students. So that was an exhibition. So in that case, it was an exhibition. In other cases, it's 10 people in a room. In some cases, it's a walk. Sometimes it's a lecture. So I think flexibility, I guess, is what I'm saying, is that what we need to do is make sure that we design the learning environment to where we want to get to in the particular learning situation.
I would cite this situation. One of the things that I've observed, and we've done a lot of different things in our galleries. But one of the things that really strikes me is when we have these tours coming in, young people from K through 12. And the one thing I picked up is that we often have classes that are really bright, and the kids, and this is the litmus test. How many questions I get when giving a tour, or my students are giving a tour, what have you. I actually like to give those tours a lot of times because I'm real curious, particularly when it's a class that has not been, these students have come from a community where they've not been exposed to art. They're coming in, you can just see them quivering. I mean, they're just, or they're slumped down. They don't even want to, what? Art? No. And by becoming really familiar with this exchange, because they would not ask any questions at all, and it really gave me a very clear indication as to where they were, I started really working on a manner in which I would talk to them and get them to, because I would find out who the leader of the group was, the leader of the pack was. And while he or she might have a big chip on their shoulder, eventually I would get them to ask a question. I mean, it'd take me a while, but once they asked that question, you could actually physically see, I wish I had a camera talking about recording, that you could actually see their postures change by the time they leave the galleries. Because it's clear that they were feeling daunted and just not, they were afraid of asking a question that wasn't too bright or what have you, and of course it didn't matter. By the time they figured out that they could participate, then they didn't even really want to leave. They started running around the galleries, and this happened, I can't tell you how many times this happens over and over and over again. And I love giving those tours because I like seeing that transition. So I know that the environment itself can operate in many different ways. I'm going to leave it
My
at
turn.
that.
I was so enthralled with what you're saying. So I have 3 things that I want to say that are 3 different, responding to sort of 3 different parts of this. In terms of service to the field, or how we connect with the larger field, and I've touched on this in various ways already this morning, but it seems to me that academic museums are somewhat distinctive in this notion of being kind of learning laboratories. And I think we know a lot about how people learn in these, what are often described as informal learning environments, however they are embedded within a very formal learning system. And I think we could do more to kind of really systematically study that and share that more broadly with the field. I think that's a way in which we have a lot of information at our disposal that could be of incredible transformative value to thinking about the role the educational role that museums play in society. And I would point again to the studies, the kinds of studies that Project Zero has been doing at Harvard as an example of the way in which we could deploy the scholarly resources within our communities to more systematically learn about what's going on in our spaces. So that's one thing. I was really struck last night, is it Adrian Randolph? Adrian Randolph. In his remarks, I loved when he kind of turned the equation around and thought also about the possibility to teach museums, which is something that we think a lot about at Smith. And one of our goals actually is to teach museum literacy. You were touching on this being an opportunity for students to be exposed to institutions that they may not have had access to earlier in their lives, and that also can be transformative in terms of how they approach the rest of their lives and engage with these kinds of cultural resources. So we see that as a broad goal for all of our visitors, but more specifically, we've recently, in the last 4 years, implemented a program that very explicitly uses the institution itself as a subject of study, and it's a program that was acknowledged earlier called the Museum's Concentration. We have students here who are seniors in that program with us this weekend, and it's also an interesting model. I just want to talk about it for a moment because it speaks also, I think, to the relationship of museums to their parent institution. The Museum's Concentration grew out of our response to a goal that was articulated within the college's strategic plan when it was adopted in 2008. And it was actually about thinking about how to strengthen the ways that students navigate the Smith curriculum. It has an open curriculum. There are no requirements outside of the major, and that's seen as both a tremendous opportunity, but also a liability if it's not used strategically by students. So the college sort of put out a call to faculty to design structures that would help support students in a process of articulating interest and then engaging in reflection. And the museum responded by proposing a program that's now become a model for the campus. And so we take great pride both in the success of what it's doing, but also the impact that it's had. And it's called Museums Concentration. It's explicitly not an undergraduate museum studies program. What it is a program that allows students to declare an interest in studying the history, theory, and methods of museums, and to do that in a fairly self-designed way. So there are 2 required courses, an entry course and an exit course, and then they choose other related courses within the curriculum that they can tailor to their own interests and curiosities. And then they're required to do 2 practical experiences in conjunction with that. And that's the match that kind of ignites the whole thing, that there's this tremendous conversation that goes back and forth between what they learn in our own museum as well as museums all around the country and the world, and the questions that they then bring back into the classroom and their own studies. So it's been, I think, a very powerful model for us to understand how we could support the core mission of the college in a fresh way, and it's been really effective for us in answering that kind of bridging question. And for us, it was, how do we bridge the interest that we see students expressing in learning within our museum and connect it back to their academic experience. So that program has done that for us. And now this concentration model that we've defined has been picked up, and there are 13 concentrations at Smith, all built on the same template. So we're very proud of that. And then to end on a kind of less positive note, I'm feeling like something that's not been discussed a lot today, but seems important to consider as we think about moving towards this goal of establishing ideal learning environments is the issue of resources. And as we talk in this very idealistic way about open access and abolishing membership and shop and other programs, which for us are critical lines of operating support, I think we should just acknowledge that there are issues for all of them, or most of us, in thinking about how we pull together the resources to develop our institutions and how we make the case for support within our host institutions.
Right. All right. Michael, I wanted to say a few things about sort of the relationships, the small, collegiate university institutions in relation to the big civic ones. One thing that's very clear, I think, to all of us is in our collections, many of us have master works, and some of us have more than others, but all of us have paintings that are very much desired for loans by many of these institutions. And it's no surprise to any of you in the audience that some of your greatest paintings and sculptures are continuously requested for loans for big shows at these institutions. And it's pretty much a one-way street. When you look at the history of how those loans move, those same institutions don't come back and say, well, of course you're going to take this show too, this blockbuster that's going to the 5 or 6 major museums, and one of which being one you worked at. And so, the question becomes at some point, well, is there any kind of give and take in this relationship, or is it always a take? And I had the really interesting experience when I was at Andover at one point. I had gotten to know George Tooker's work. I'd been very moved by it as a young artist in San Francisco. I saw a retrospective of it, found out he was an Andover alumnus. Actually turned out to be a classmate of my father, believe it or not. And we became great friends, and he ended up giving his whole drawing collection of all the studies for his paintings to Andover, and I wanted to borrow the 12 or 14 of his key paintings to show with the drawings. And the Met refused a loan of the government bureau, if you know that fabulous, bureaucratic painting where people are staring out of these little holes. It's just a fabulous picture. And they refused it, and I couldn't believe it. George said, and they refused it on the grounds of it's too fragile to travel. He said, my God, this painting's as stable as can be. You got to have it for the show. What are you going to do about it? Well, look, we had loaned 26 great masterworks of the Addisons sequentially without ever requesting a work, and return. I was hopping mad. I was about to write one of those letters. God damn it, if you don't loan this painting, you'll never get another loan out of Andover. And one of my wonderful donors said, cool down, Jock. Write him the most unctuous, flattering letter you can possibly. Just crawl on your belly like a groveling reptile and it'll pop out. and he was right. I won't name the curator, but it popped out and we had the show. But it made me think later that there were instances in which this notion of people keep borrowing from us, why don't we, knowing the power of a great individual object, why don't we ask for some of these loans in return? We're not meant to, nor are we going to get onto the circuit of the blockbuster, the big ticket paying exhibition. That's not our culture. But we could certainly ask for works back. So not too long ago at Yale, we asked MoMA to loan us Starry Night, and we asked for the Met to loan us their Van Gogh of the same scene during the daytime. And they lent it to us, and we put them up in the gallery free, and let people just come in and spend a whole lot of time with those pictures, not having to pay, and come in for time tickets where they could just, a bunch of people go into those rooms, not jammed in the way you'd see them in New York, but just sit in a room quietly with these things and rotate. That's a different experience of those paintings that never move across those two institutions. And of course, we'd lend our Van Gogh to the Clark thing and so forth. So in other words, there's some negotiating we can all do, I guess I'm saying, with some of these institutions, because they're going to keep coming after our greatest works, and we're going to probably want to loan them, but why can't we ask for some things back and particularly state the importance they will play in the life of our faculty members, our courses, et cetera, and ask for a little cultural equity? I think that's fair, isn't it?
I do too, and you can have those shows, those blockbusters. When I left Philadelphia, I was working on a Leger show that came to fruition, but it has such a high loan fee that very few of our colleagues could ever afford that. And so what we have to persuade our colleagues is actually, just as we're persuading our administrations and our boards, is the benefits of a show that goes beyond just the attendance, but it could actually be, this is a show that could light up a campus, and these are the departments who could work with it, and these are the faculty members who could actually possibly write for the catalog. Right. And I think that will come. I really feel like this is our time. This is a wonderful moment in our field, and we're demonstrating leadership. And I'm seeing a lot of mission drift in the civic museums, and you mentioned some of what's happening. I think that they're chasing their tails a little bit, because as they struggle to pay operating costs, they're monetizing the collections. So the collections are now in Seoul, they're not in New York, and so there's this problem where that's a death spiral to me, because you're only going to get deeper and deeper into this problem. You've got to go back to your mission. You've got to make your mission very clear. And many of those institutions began as educational institutions. They had a civic responsibility to teach the citizens of their cities that they've kind of got away from. And I just feel like it's like something that cannot go on for much longer. Right. I really feel, and I feel they'll look to us. I think they already do look to us. Well,
I think you all know there's a class action suit been filed against the Met for the language it uses on the contribution coming in, know, and people are starting to test these things and in ways that we're going to see, frankly, I think more of in the future.
Yeah. Sylvia?
Well, first I want to pick up on something that Jessica said that I think is critical to all museums, and that is the persistent undercapitalization of our institutions, and that threatens our sustainability. I know I have endowment envy of some of the people in this room, but that just makes me realize all the more how of the good work that our board and I have to do to try and increase our endowment. But still, it's not just that we're undercapitalized, but there's also, we need to help our grantors understand and rethink their business model as well. There's an organization in Seattle that's based in Seattle, but it's nationwide, called Grantmakers in the Arts. And they're trying to help grantors understand that they need to support those who end the year in the black. They need to support building up reserves, not just support those who are gasping for air. And I think that's a model that we all should be thinking about. That doesn't address the question, it just responds to what Jessica's talking about. What I think about, I look around the room and I see the extraordinary collegial generosity that we share as academic college and university art museums. And one of the distinctions is that we our research institutions, so why don't we share our research about what we do well, and particularly what we're not doing so well, or what we need help with? For me, it seems that we have an opportunity to become an even stronger cohort, for which I want to thank you, Michael, for giving us the opportunity to be that this weekend, and for us to be able to share the results of the successes and the failures. There's no question in my mind that works of art have value as objects, but the experience is the priceless aspect behind and underlying all that we do. And I believe that if we work together, we can figure out where the field is going to take us, which reminds me actually of a great quote. Wayne Gretzky, the terrific hockey player, was asked once how he was so successful being the great hockey player he was, and his answer was, "It's simple, I just skated to where the puck would be." So together, we can skate to where the puck would be.
That's great, great. Well, we have about 5 more minutes, which I think gives us a time for a rapid fire kind of thinking about has anything struck the panelists during this conference? I know for myself, Kenja's remark about the ecosystem of ownership just keeps resonating and resonating, and will probably resonate for a long time. But are there things that have emerged in the past 2 days that have made you stop and think about your practice and where you go from here?
May I defer first?
You can defer.
Thank you.
Tina.
I was going to, well, you know, I think there are a lot of things, my goodness, because we are obviously in a place, I mean, when you start talking about undercapitalization, I mean, we can go down the list in terms of what our needs are, and I can't even touch that subject here. But I'm struck by the gentleman from Quest,
David Helfand. Yeah.
David Helfand. I think his presentation to me was really resonated in terms of how I'm probably going to, I mean, there are a lot of things that I would like to approach differently at the institution. And his idea of really just looking at how we learn that process of how the brain operates and being singularly focused on, well, technically, we could only be singularly focused based on our situation, but still, he underscored that for our situation. The other thing is that there are several ideas. Hockley, who gave that wonderful presentation, that tour in the Shun Hunger exhibition, and how he engaged his students to select these works. It was, you know, very complex, very well done. I'm leaving with a lot of ideas and concepts to infuse and use in our gallery. So I'm really happy about that. I need to look at my notes. So I'm going to pass that on, and then I'm going to come back. So, yeah.
Jessica, what has struck you?
I've been, the thing that's mostly struck me is how grateful I feel to you all for organizing this and bringing all of us together for this conversation. It's been so, so productive for, I hope everybody here, certainly for me, and it's such an act of generosity for you to commit your staff to this labor and to welcome us all in such an unrestricted way. So I'd like to just publicly say thank you.
It's a pleasure.
And then we like you, or I've come to this like you, with a very specific curiosity related to a project that we're embarking on, which is very modest in scale compared to what you're thinking about, but we're preparing. Our building is now 10 years old and due for some refurbishment, and so we're preparing to use that as an opportunity to reinstall our galleries, and we're thinking about a new interpretive framework that will be guided by the college's stated learning objectives. So really understanding how, how could we hang our collection in ways that supports the learning goals that the school has identified for its students. And so we've been digging in and focusing on that a lot, but I would say that this conversation's been so helpful in pulling me back a little bit to think about beyond those very specific goals, how do people learn? And what does that ideal learning environment look like? And how can our galleries aspire to be more of that kind of space? And so the timing of this for us is couldn't be better, because there's still room in our conversation to kind of think. And so I think particularly yesterday morning, the ideas that were opened up about how people learn and the value of collaborative processes and creating more flexible spaces and creating a structure that can be a little bit nimbler and more responsive to dialogue with your communities and work that you all model so beautifully at the Hood. So.
Yeah, the thing that's struck me too about this particular conference is that what's happening here now and what happened out of the wonderful support we got from the Mellon Foundation to do some collection sharing between the Hood, the Smith, Mount Holyoke, Oberlin, Bowdoin, and Williams College, is that I think those of us who participated in that program, first of all, need to acknowledge someone else, which was so much of what we're doing in this field goes back sometimes that a single person can make a real difference in the field, and that's Angelica Rudenstein. Look what that woman did with her vision at the Mellon Foundation, willing to support this kind of activity. And I'm thinking of Kathy Hart. Look at the pioneers in the field who've then become mentors to many other people who've then mentored yet others. We've probably got 3 generations of people who are now active in this field. And what I've personally hoped in crafting that proposal to Mellon was that in Yale wanting to share its collections with all of you, was that we felt we had a lot to gain by seeing what would other people want to borrow in order to teach a course or courses or to reinstall our collections in ways we might not have thought of ourselves. In other words, just owning the objects is one thing, but having them looked at, thought about, installed, taught with in different ways brings back knowledge, which again gets back to the fundamental mission of our institutions. We're about creating knowledge and sharing it, right? So for us, it's been spectacular to see the results of what everyone's done with this. And what's even more exciting to me is the fact that this has become all of a sudden a much more reciprocal set of relationships. You've organized this collection here. All these other things, this gathering. People are coming up with other projects and things in which they want to do things with each other already. So it's clearly going to breed something not only amongst those who've already worked together, but there are others of you who I'm sure are already ginning up projects elsewhere. And so I think it's been good for the field that things like this have happened, and this is certainly the most, I was telling someone this morning, this is the most exciting professional meeting of any kind I've been to, going back to the alternative space days of my artist youth, when we were all trying to figure out how to found places and cheap real estate of American cities when we got out of our art schools with MFAs. So I just think this is a really interesting moment in which we learn something fundamental from one another. And John, I'm thinking of you in terms of what Jessica just said about her desire to maybe reinstall the Smith collections. Of all the 6 institutions that work with us, Williams College, I believe, brought 11 faculty members to Yale with their whole team, and John oversaw ultimately the complete reinstallation of the Williams College Museum with, 300 works from your collection and 50 from ours, and you guys just taught the bejesus out of that reinstallation for 2 years. And those kind of longer-term loans amongst ourselves don't need to cost a whole lot. In terms of the resource issue, we can share this stuff freely. We're not ginning each other with loan fees, et cetera, et cetera. And frankly, we've got intermarried donors between these institutions that see this, and I'm looking at these fabulous women out here, In fact, we just got a major multi-million-dollar endowment from a Smith-Yale relationship that wants this kind of thing to continue, not just tomorrow or next day, in perpetuity. So I think, part of our job, and I'm looking at these fabulous Mount Holyoke women, is, you and Smith and Wellesley and women have often led the charge, and look at the gender disparity still in this room amongst the field, right? It's still 80, 85, 15 or 85, 20, right? Women have met the muses. Who was talking about the role of women as muses, right? Well, women have continued to lead in this field of the sense of sharing and nurturing in the field. And I think you're going to find that there's going to be donor responsiveness throughout these institutions if we make the case for what we're doing, not just individually, but as a field that collaborates and partners with one another generously, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Large and small. One of the big small things was the idea of slowing down, and that's a David Helfand concept of how do we slow down in front of a work of art, and how do we encourage our students to do the same. And so lots and lots of thoughts. So it was a simple moment, but a lot of resonance there. I'm deeply impressed that there is a board of overseers or trustees here. And I think students and trustees and colleagues, I think that opens up a whole new dialogue. And I wish I could have flown my whole clan from Seattle, but that would have been a Herculean feat. But perhaps next time, based on the success of this one. Collegial exchange, again, the thing that I'm the most struck by is truly how much difference there is. And I came here hoping to get some good ideas how to solve some problems we have. I got more than I could have hoped for, but I also was reminded that you can look out for the ideas to come in, but you also have to keep focused on what your relationship, like I said earlier, with your peer institution, with your host institution is, and take in a lot of the strategies that are utilized here, but then interpret them based on what makes the most sense for your own institution in your own place.
Finally, John.
Well, I want to build off what everybody else is saying. For me, the great thing about this conference has been realizing, we think of ourselves somehow as small, but you look out here, you realize that, no, we're like vast. We've got this enormous staff. We have a staff of 50 directors and 60 curators and 100 academic outreach curators and so forth. And that's really reassuring, and especially when I think about lowering the barriers to loans. There's a small group in the Northeast of museum people who get together, and one of the things we're talking about is, if we think about the 15 college museums, small college museums in the Northeast, that's an enormous collection. It's just this huge thing. And if Bowdoin has the entire set, which you do, of the Curtis portfolios, there's no need for Mount Holyoke to be out there trying to get the Curtis portfolio. They're very generous. Next time we need the Curtis portfolio, it's there, right? But, what I'm saying is that, one of the things that I'm getting out of this conference, and I miss them, but the camaraderie and the generosity and the spirit that we're all here with, because we together have this kind of real impact on our communities and on our regions that we can have together, and it's very reassuring.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, we often forget that there are 700 teaching museums in this country, and we've seen a huge turnout for this conference, and I come back to what I said at the beginning, which is really that this is our time. This is a great moment in our history, a pivotal moment. We have to take advantage of it. So with that, I'd like to thank the panelists, and we're going to turn it over to you to respond to not only what you've heard at this morning's session, but also the entire conference. What has struck you? We're eager to hear your feedback. What have we not covered? And where do we go from here? Mm-hmm. And as always, we have microphones at the back, and I can see a hand already. Looks like Giovanna. We'll get to you, Maggie, next.
Shy ones at this point, huh?
I've been really quick because I have to go. But I wanted to hurry it up, get my act in. I wanted, first of all, to thank Michael and the Hood for the opportunity to have come to this from Oxford. And as you know, we're the new kids on the block. So I have spent a great deal of time ruminating over what I've been hearing. But also just to very quickly share a perspective from the other side of the pond to just on I would say, small things, but they actually have big impact. The first one that I just wanted to share with you is kind of this idea of skating over the real and the virtual that concerns me, because I have, as all of you do, a need to defend what I'm doing because it's so new. So I'm constantly getting pushback from my community. I think understanding the strengths and the weaknesses of the real and the virtual as part of the same process is actually critical to what we do. What we call object-based learning, I think everyone in this room essentially shares the same assumptions, but what we owe to the students and to the faculty, our task is to explain the differences between how we can use the real and how it affects our understanding of the virtual. And I think, for me, this cannot be done without rigorous comparative work. And I think this is where it plays into my second point, which is metrics. Having, of course, done a survey of the literature before I took this job, I was concerned because I'm a qualitative person, but I'm also a social scientist, so my quant tends to rise, it tends to bubble to the surface. And I see this as a sandwich. I see this wonderful qualitative body of material that has accumulated over decades here, which we are beginning over there to sort of dip into, cherry picking. At the end, I suspect the qualitative is going to inform the process of teaching in teaching museums. In the middle bit, what we're working on, because we have a unique set of circumstances in the UK, is a series of quantitative experiments done with experimental psychologists, which I want to share with this community as and when it gets off the ground. Because we have standardized tests, we have finals at the end of 3 years, the courses are rigid, we do not have a liberal arts program. One of the things that we are able to do in a way that perhaps can't happen in the US environment is a better approach to quantitative work within our field. And I'm just flagging this now for all of you that I think there's an opportunity. We may fail spectacularly, but to the extent that we're going to try, this is something I'd like to inject into this community, because outward facing, I just don't hear enough persuasive language about the benefits of what it is we do. I think there are so many inbuilt assumptions that have no controls against them. This is the social scientist speaking. That I would love to be able to contribute to this community, some opportunity here to put into play this language of social science that enables us to make more rigorous arguments. So on that note, that's where I would depart, but I would depart also saying thank you to all of you for what gives me an opportunity to go back and speak much more persuasively about the power of what it is that we do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Maggie had a question, and then we'll get over here.
Thank you. I'm Maggie Lynn from the Smith College Museum of Art, and I wanted to raise another issue which seems like it's a challenge, responsibility, and an opportunity, which is that most of our colleges and universities have admissions offices which are actively gathering together diverse communities of students, both diverse racially, economically, geographically. So we have this ready-made diverse community. And it seems like this presents a great opportunity for us to make really great strides in both diversifying the field of museum professionals, but also the spectrum of museum visitors. And so I wonder if there are specific ways that you see that we could work to address that challenge on our campuses, and hopefully in 20 years have this be a more diverse room.
Yeah, I think it starts with the collection, what you show. Every student should be able to find themselves in the museum. If you've got a young person from India on campus, there should be some way that person can find themselves reflected in the works in the museum. So certainly, to the degree that it's possible, the collection should reflect that. Diversity in the field is taking time. It's beginning to happen, I think, but it does start, I think, with how you behave and your openness to show a wide range of work in your museum.
In the case of Clark Atlanta, I've had over the years numerous, let me get the question straight, because it seemed like it was twofold in terms of attracting students to the institution and having works. Okay, but then there was twofold in terms of also coming into the field. Is that right? Yeah, I was just, okay. Certainly, let me deal with the latter, which is coming into the field. Certainly, I've had wonderful students to work with the collection over the years, several of whom, well, 2 of whom for certain went into the field, got fellowships with the Smithsonian and the Studio Museum in Harlem, but then left the field completely, feeling that they weren't they weren't making enough money is really what it came down to. It just wasn't, so that's a whole nother story. But going into the works, of course, our collection, we're a historically black institution, so, and we do have students that come from Asia, India, the continent of Africa, and we actually do have works. It's not just primarily African. We have other works by other ethnicities, so it's included. They can see themselves represented to some degree, so it just depends on which works. I don't know.
Patty, you got a mic?
I'm part of the Mount Holyoke contingent, and for me, getting people engaged at all levels is probably the most critical thing we can do. And when John was talking about getting everything digitized and how important that is, while dealing with the real work is the ultimate goal we want people to be able to do with these objects, we first of all, for the, millions of people have had, especially in the inner cities and in other areas, they've had no exposure to art whatsoever. And even our teens, with all the video games, are busy on video games. So my question is, has anybody thought about, now that we have so many works digitalized, have we started creating video games that would entice them to get interested in these works of art, to then want to go on and see the actual art? And maybe this is something that this group could work on.
I'll respond by saying that I'm the parent of a 13-year-old, and the Tate in London has a game called Tate Trumps, which is a virtual card game that you play with works in their collection that have relative power. And then they've also developed a game that's a kind of Super Mario race through art history, and she's addicted to both of them. So there are museums that are modeling that. I'm not aware of an academic museum that.
But a huge amount of artists are interested in this, and MoMA had a show recently, and Mary Flanagan, who's on our faculty, works with games. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point. Actually, Sylvia, you brought that up, so that statistic, right? Yeah. Who's that? You're next, and then we'll go to you.
Hi, I'm Gretchen Dietrich from the University of Utah's Art Museum in Salt Lake City, and I want to ask a question about the kind of art that we exhibit and we collect. And I realize that it's just sort of I just think it's true, and I don't know that it is, that younger people, our students especially, find contemporary art sort of easy to access and find their ways into that work and kind of understand what it's about. And I worry that as more and more university art museums are trending towards showing more contemporary art, what does that mean? And are there ways to use contemporary art to build bridges to our historic collections? And I've certainly worked at a number of museums that have done that well. But I just want to ask that question, is that right? Is that right? And are we thinking about that in the right way?
Jock?
I can start. Our focus is on the contemporary, and we find that a lot of people have a hard time of any age with contemporary art, and they feel intimidated. It's not necessarily something that they even know how to approach. And so we focus on artists. Artists are at the center of everything we do. Artists help us. They're great ambassadors. We introduce young people, high school students and up, to the artists themselves, so it humanizes the work to some degree. But that may be a function of the fact that we show unconventional contemporary art. So it may be just our own experience.
I'd just like to add that I think, your sense of the field may be right in terms of art history programs, particularly graduate art history programs. The greatest number of applicants to Yale's PhD in art history is definitely in the field of modern and contemporary art, whereas our own collections, of course, are very encyclopedic and in some cases extraordinarily rich. And one of our concerns, quite frankly, has been, how many people are there out there in the field who are truly terrific curators of early Renaissance painting and scholars? How many are really great scholars and curators of African art or Indo-Pacific art or so forth? And frankly, there's a dearth of such people. And when we've launched searches to hire those people, at our institution, those searches have often come down to thinking that, you're choosing from a pool of maybe 3 or 4 people of the quality you might like in the whole world, and they're not standing in an unemployment line. You're going to have to steal them from some other major institution to get them to come to your institution. But I think what it's done for me in thinking about this, given Yale's collections, that it's all the more important to get a curator who's not only an expert in the field, but one who wants to teach the next generation, or the knowledge that resides with some of those people is just going to die off. And what a teacher always does, ultimately before he or she retires, is you've kind of you've shared and given away your knowledge, so it's never lost. When you literally die, your brain goes dead, as Mr. Heflin described to us, and what you've had is may not reside anymore in your own corporal body, but you've given it away to these students you've taught all these years. What could be better? So I think that issue of looking at the range of the field of art and culture, particularly as our universities and colleges have become more global in their student bodies and faculty and curriculum, it really behooves us to pay real attention to that issue and not overweight, one particular field or department too heavily, unless that's the actual purview of the institution, which in Sylvia's case, she's doing what she does also in the context of, as you said yesterday, another great civic institution nearby that can handle those other aspects of the task.
Yeah. We had another question here. No.
Are you talking to Charlotte?
I am.
Hi.
You've got the mic.
I'm Sonnet Coggins from the Williams College Museum of Art, where I've been for 3 weeks. And I'm actually really nervous standing up here talking to all of you, but I figure the thing that probably struck me most in the conference in terms of one little sticky idea was this idea that we should be embodying the risk that is really at the heart of every artwork in our collection, that incredible risk-taking that was part of the artistic process. So here I am. So I have 2 thoughts that I wanted to share with you. And the first is that Tina Olsen, the director, has been reminding me to keep looking at the whole climate that I'm now in, coming from the Denver Art Museum 4 weeks ago, with new eyes, and to keep that freshness. And so I feel really lucky to be here among all of you with these new eyes and thinking a lot about a thread of the conversation, which has been the relationship to civic or regional museums. And I think one of those things that's sticking out for me is that, yes, there's a nimbleness in all kinds of ways in collection sharing and thinking about revenue streams differently. And I think for me what's striking me is that really, with an incredible amount of variety or variation on this, we all have communities when we're looking at the faculty and student audiences that are relatively defined in terms of age. They're smart, inquisitive people. They're relatively defined in terms of geographic area. And I think that collectively, we are a lab for the broader field of museums to do some interesting things and think about scalability in that way. And I think, yes, they are looking to college museums, but I think we might be able to take a more active role in sharing those ideas outwardly, because what I'm hearing here is incredible thought about merging of different ways of thinking and starting all kinds of new experiments. So that's one, and I'll be quick about the second. But I was sitting here kind of jumping out of my skin during this conversation of the digital and the authentic. And I think I just wanted to mention one thing, that a report that stuck with me, the NEA report, and I just pulled it up here to remind myself how technology influences arts participation. And the key finding was that people who engage with art online and through media are 2 to 3 times more likely to visit. And so I think we're really looking at this problem narrowly when we're saying it's bad or good. It's a continuum, and I think we're not expecting the same things of an original work of art as we are of a digital art work, representation of it. So I think it's almost a non-issue. They're both in service of what we're doing, and we're not looking for the same thing out of both of them. And I think, too, just to remind, this occurred to me, too, we've had catalogs for a very long time that have replicated works of art, and no one has ever thought that those would keep people away.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
Touché.
I think the basic message is that Walter Benjamin was wrong. Works of art just do not lose their aura. I think he had this idea that the Mona Lisa might be, in an age of mechanical reproduction, no one will be looking at it. There'll be like these tumbleweeds going down the corridors of the Louvre. And you go there and you have to queue, as you know, with everyone else, and it's behind bullet plate glass. No, but I think you raised some great points. I mean, I'm someone who did come from like you came from Denver, I came from Philadelphia, and when I think back now, knowing what I do now with Jock's collection sharing and the collegiality and generosity of this group, when I think of what we had in storage and what could have been lent to campuses, and storage at the Philadelphia Museum's case is 4 miles away. It's at the Navy Yard. I won't give you the address, but it's sort of incredible. So no one ever went there. The curators went there to work and study the collections and conserve the collections. But all of that seems to me to just, at a certain point, become about wealth accumulation. You know, if you've got 30 Picassos and someone this year gives you 3 more, and so the future is now going to be, you know, and I've said this again and again, you know, we have to find ways to get access to those collections. And the digital age is a great way to do that. But it also has to be about collection sharing. And I think the idea in our lifetimes really will be no longer how do you build a collection. It's about what are you going to do with that collection. I see a question right there. Yeah, Anne?
Michael, I want to reiterate the thanks that has already been expressed to you and also to the panelists and everybody else who's participated in the conference. My husband and I, Frank and I, as many of you know, are going to be starting shortly at Bowdoin as new directors. We're really looking forward to it. And Frank keeps saying that this felt like our orientation weekend. This is an amazing community, and there's been such a sense of optimism expressed by everybody who we've encountered. And this actually leads me to want to build on the question you just asked about collection sharing, and that is sort of the larger question of knowledge sharing. There are a number of associations such as the AAMC, the Association of Art Museum Curators. I'm a works on paper person, so I belong to Print Council. And there are some wonderful mechanisms through which people share information very freely and easily. And perhaps everybody in this room already knows that such a thing exists. But I just wanted to sort of ask the question of the panelists, but really more generally of everybody in the room, what it might mean to create some sort of a resource that enables us to maintain the connections that have been made this weekend, that will probably be reiterated at the AAMG in Baltimore. And if there's some way that we can just very simply build on, perhaps the list of participants that you have already, Michael, to create a network that would enable us to reach out with our questions, our observations, maybe even ideas about collection sharing and so forth. So thank you.
I wanted to say something that I think I mentioned yesterday that's similar to what this young lady was saying, and that's the idea of how we as a collective can move forward in reaching not just our professional organizations, the AAMD or the museums and galleries, but the other academic professional groups that meet nationwide, where faculty members actually go to have conferences such as these. But because I think that that's an important area where if there are representatives of people from this group can make presentations to disseminate information that may in fact stimulate some type of interaction across the campus, across the aisle as far as the discipline is concerned, because that's really what the goal is to really see this learning process, this model change, as Helfand was stating. So if there is a collective that's established, I would definitely like to see how that can then move forward into other academic areas from this level.
And you saw yesterday in the afternoon session, which was more of a show and tell, the real innovative work that's happening in the field. And we deliberately kept the panels sort of tight, and we had those breakout sessions because we really didn't want to cram this. And Jock and I were talking this morning about, you go to AAMD, you're in a room like this for 10 hours. You don't see art. You mentioned Puerto Rico, or you never see the sun, and we wanted people to get out. We wanted to have these opportunities for engagement and different sizes of groups. But you're all doing amazing work. And if I was to think of a forum, I would love to see a forum where we could all put in the work that we're doing on a website so that you could actually think about, how other people have tackled this issue of student engagement. What are the innovations that are happening right now? I think when you have so many professional bodies, and in New England we have NEMA, the New England Museum Association, and we have NESCAMA, the New England Small College Museum Association. Jock, you're not allowed to go to that, but Jessica and I go to that. And so you have all these professional associations, but I think that while they're great for networking, I think what might be missing right now are those forums where we can share work, share ideas. Let's take another question. Yes?
Sorry. Catherine Giltrap from Trinity College Dublin in Ireland. And I want to say thank you for this wonderful opportunity to listen to you all and to share with you all, because I've been meaning to try and find you in our international conferences, and obviously this was the place I needed to come, so thank you. It's been inspiring, to say the least. But I wanted to share with you, we were talking about risk, sharing collections, and this wonderful phrase which we keep, we'll go home with, the ecosystem of ownership that Kenji came up with. And I wanted to share with you how our collection has actually been created by risk and a sense of ownership. And that's by virtue of a hire scheme, a picture hire scheme, which was influenced by Clare College, Cambridge. And a geneticist who came to us 50 years ago set up our genetics department, but within a year or so decided he'd set up a hire scheme of the pictures that the pictures we didn't have at that point. So they created the desire to collect modern art for its own sake. We had 400 years of commissioning portraits, etc. But so this engendered a passion in the students, and it was actually set up with students, 4 students chatting in a room with this geneticist. And we actually caught one of these guys and brought him back for a 50th anniversary and reunited him with one of his roommates, funnily enough, through art. But the point is that this whole passion for art and being involved across the campus engendered the collection, but a passion to learn. And so they started with teaching in a general course and then created the Department of the Visual Arts. So this is how it came about, from the students being interested in being engaged with contemporary art in their time. And works were being chosen by the students, because a volunteer team became involved to administer the hire scheme and to be ambassadors to their peers. And so we collected, and then we set up our art gallery. And in a strange way, we actually don't run our art gallery anymore. We set up one, and then we set up another permanent solution to it, and our Arts Council runs it, but that's for various reasons, and they do it in a very good way. But our campus is our gallery now. So we actually give the artworks to the students to go to their rooms. They go with their artworks that they've self-selected, they've curated for their rooms. It's a risk, believe me. And coming from a background of being a curator, I don't know how many nightmares I've had, but it's so worth it. And I know it firsthand because, I teach now with these students as well, but when I was a student, I hired from it. I was a peer involved me in the scheme, and she asked me, she said, you should get involved with this, and then you should work in the University Art Gallery. And I did, and I was very nervous, which I am now too, but it changed the way I approached art and I approached everything. I ended up working with the academic who was charged with the modern art collection at the time, and found myself 11 years later coming back to the first curator role, to professionalize the collections, and now giving opportunities to the students and passing that baton on. And I feel that this, one person, and that was one person, George Dawson, who was a geneticist, he made the difference, as Angelica Rudenstein has changed the scenery in the US, and now this is impacting across the globe, across to UK, Ireland, and Australia. They're all getting interested in this particular nexus between community, curriculum, and collections, and it's just fascinating, and thank you for the experience.
Hello, my name is Francesca Gabrielle, and I'm a volunteer as a docent at the Hood, and I also work at the Hopkins Center. I have a comment and sort of just a reminder that one of the issues that we face in this field is that as schools take art and music out of the classrooms and sort of abolish those programs, students are literally being taught that art isn't important to learn. So it's sort of one of the challenges that we're facing is sort of bringing that back and saying, no, that's not the case. But that's, I think, part of the hesitation and sort of the fear that we see in the students that we have coming in is that they've never been taught that art is important. But I also think if we can look at it as an opportunity and even a privilege that we are able to give back. I know a lot of our conversation have been about university students, but I know our institutions often have K through 12 students coming in as well, but we are right there to teach them that art is amazing. It's part of our life. It's in everything that we do. And we have that, have a moment to make those connections with the kids and to even teach them that there are jobs in the arts. Like, as we can see in this room, there are actual real-life jobs that you can get after going to college and university. That's all right to go to art school. That's all right to take these art classes and to go on, that there's a future for you, that it's a place for students, and it's important in our culture and our life. So I just wanted to give us a reminder that what our culture is saying about art is really important, and how can we find ways to combat that and make the change as well.
I think that's one of the biggest problems we face. And you're exactly right to point out that K through 12 education is not emphasizing the arts. In many respects, when I think about this moment, you know, art education at the K through 12 level is now really museum education. You know, we're fulfilling that empty space that used to be instruction in the classroom. And maybe this is a Bauhaus moment where the museums can actually take a bit of ownership if we're teaching all of these students, you know, because we know they will then go on, and if we don't deal with this issue, we're going to lose generations of people who will grow up really not respecting art, and we know what that means. So I don't know if the other panelists, you know, want to comment on that.
One thing I think that's been really kind of exciting for us in New Haven is everyone knows we've done this renovation of the art gallery over the last 15 years, but a lot of you might not know that the city of New Haven has collaborated with us in the downtown in building and opening a 600-student arts magnet high school designed by Cesar Pelli that's 2 blocks from the Yale Art Gallery. So those students now just walk to the gallery every single week for classes. They don't have to arrange buses and field trip passes and so forth and so on. And 3 blocks away, a major junior college, Gateway Community College, just opened its facility downtown. So again, the junior college constituents are coming, and Jessica Sack, who's here, who's our now senior associate curator of public education, has a huge program of serving K through 12 students, and again, that's what our graduate student gallery teacher program runs, and those students now compete from all over the university to do that program rather than be a traditional RA or TA, and yet again, I think when it comes to this issue of resources, some of these programs need to be taken to some of our most thoughtful philanthropists and say, these are important, to try them in a pilot phase or whatever phase, and then if they work, then make the case that these things should be endowed. You know, I mean, why wouldn't someone want to put some resources into some of this, given how important some of these issues are for the future of, you know, citizens of our country? I mean, it's not an illogical request to make.
Williams has free busing, right?
Yeah. I mean, one of the great things, speaking with my old hat on for a moment, about Williams was that a very enlightened donor gave a sizable amount of money and tied up part of it only for education, so they could have free busing. Both at Williams and also at Mount Holyoke, you can draw a circle around the college and find that there's not a single art program left within 30, 40 miles radius. You have to kind of draw a lopsided kidney-shaped one at Mount Holyoke so you avoid Amherst, Northampton. But it's the point. The point maintains that we are in fact dealing with it, and both at Williams and at Mount Holyoke, the outreach and trying to pay for this is exceedingly important. Part of the reason for digitization is to start reaching out to these people to let them have a pre and post experience. But absolutely, this is it's more than just something we can do. It's something we should be doing. The museum can be the most porous structure on campus in terms of the community, the place where the community really does. I love the crossroads metaphor of a college art museum as being a place where art and ideas meet, where psychiatrists and sociologists meet, where community members and students meet, and it is terribly important.
Yeah. John, let me just expand on that. I think these relationships also ask of us who are directors to have a greater civic involvement in the cities we live in, to get to know our mayors, our superintendent of schools and others, is just at the same time that we want to be good university citizens. The more we function in that role, the more support we get from our administrations. And that same level of citizenry can be shared down throughout the staff, so that many people at our museum who can speak more eloquently than I can in terms of the functionality of these programs and services that are being provided. So, as much as we directors have a responsibility for leadership, we can share that the same way we want to share it with students and, as members of these communities with us. I think, for example, one of the people I admire so much in the world is Joe Thompson. What I've seen has happened to the city of North Adams, Massachusetts, with the creation of Mass MoCA and how that's been run in service not only of that city, but what it's done for the whole, basically Berkshire community, and what it's done for Williams students and many of us who bring our students there and have collaborated with Joe. So, there's some wonderful leadership models to look for, and for some of us who want to learn more about some of those activities and how they've happened, I think, everyone in this field ought to feel comfortable to contact those of us who've had experiences in this area and would be happy to share knowledge of how certain projects and programs have gotten going.
Adicia, I think you had a question.
As the student, I would speak as the student. In other words, we haven't seen, he has had no voice so far. The fact is that I think when they're very small, the video games take over their free time, and then, going to scary movies after that. But now there's this addition of the preschool girl is texting to her friends rather than looking at her across the table, and is constantly looking down at these machines. And what are we doing about it? And we have the problem of suicides in our schools in New York, let alone everywhere else, and the pressure, the parent pressure, let alone the financial pressures and the school pressures to make the parents happy. But whatever it is, suicide's a very important part of the situation. I'm saying that the museum, and Jock Reynolds brought it up, has to give them a place where they can get an emotional response, where they can be given a chance to relax, to feel excitement when they see a painting, to feel whatever it is that turns them on or turns them to relax seeing the same painting or another painting. I think this responsibility to make it something, a health place, a place where they can find peace, and I think is definitely should be a part of your program.
Okay, where's our next question? Right here.
It just seems to me as well that if one is defining success within the context of a college art museum and teaching through a liberal arts education the idea of taking risks, that out there in the community, risk-taking is not a big priority. Learning how to color in boxes on standardized tests is what produces results for a lot of students. So in terms of their ability to get into the programs that you all are already promoting. And I think there's a real tension there between what's being promoted as the basis of success for kids out in the communities and what we view as being a priority in our in our institutions.
Yeah. Does anyone want to take that? Or David Helfand addressed that in his presentation. And
I could just say one quick thing about risk-taking. Well, I think all of us engage this, that by the time a student today has taken SATs and AP classes and they got into one of these great liberal arts schools, taking a risk is the last thing they want to do. You know, they've learned how to get the right answer, and you know, my first encounter with it, frankly, was when I got to Williams, and I had these like super type A students who were amazing, and they're like, no, just give me the answers. I'm going to give them back to you. I'm going to nail this thing. Well, I don't know what the Edward Hopper painting means. You know, it's like, where are we going with it? So you're right. We need to have embedded in our practice behavior that encourages these sorts of things like risk taking if they don't get there with that already.
Here's another question. It's coming.
Good.
Well, I'm Susan Weatherby, and I'm also part of the Mount Holyoke cheering squad, so it's wonderful to be here. I have both a comment and a question. With respect to the curator from the Ashmolean, I think that her point of trying to quantify the case for object-based teaching is a strong one, as you have all adequately addressed. But I also think that the anecdote is a very, very powerful convincer, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. And I think that we also need to have faith in the object. It's the art object itself that is going to win the day and is always going to be with us and will be there for others to interpret and carry that message forward. My question is that all of you who represent your institutions have very good bases and foundations for object-based teaching to try and attempt to the greatest extent possible to integrate the collections across the curriculum. And I think that all of us in this room support that enormously. My question to you is, looking forward, and based on your experiences looking backward, do you see any challenges or pitfalls in the continued success and growth of these programs that you can perhaps identify and be proactive in solving them before they create problems for you and your students and your institutions going forward?
Who wants to take that?
I'll take a piece of it. I think, you know, it's not so much a potential pitfall, but I think as we want to engage more and more the broader sense of how the faculty and the curricula of our colleges and universities use these collections, that we have to understand that in approaching faculty members that may or may not have much, if any, experience in using artworks and object-based learning, is that we have to have people in these positions of curators of academic affairs. We gone dead? Oh no. That are themselves tremendously active learners, because they, in order to make these outreaches successful, have to be voracious learners about the nature of the syllabi and the courses that other people are teaching, so that when they make those approaches, they're, in a sense, reaching out is reciprocally received by, hey, this person took enough to really understand something about this course and just not coming to me with some flaky request as to why to come over to an object classroom. So I think, you know, the quality of leadership of many of the people in this room and how they need to continue to be voracious learners. And this came up, I think, Pam and Kathy, some of your panels, what kind of support do these people need? Do they need time for some of their own research and growth beyond the fact that many of you are working flat out all the time? These are very good questions. They come back to the question, too, of what kind of resources are provided to those people. At Yale, if you're a history of art faculty member, you get a sabbatical for 6 months every three years. How many of us in this field get a sabbatical? Any hands? Huh? Anybody in this field? Not a single one, right? So where is some of the equity in terms of a learning community when it comes to how faculties are staffed and supported versus what we, I think, feel is an increasingly important field and people who are very able? many of whom have frankly, in some cases, given up tenure. I gave up university tenure job to do this because I think it was more interesting. And we have a number of people here who've come that way or who've crossed over, as Michael has from a major public museum. So, we have to make the case for that. We have to make the case for that through our daily work, but we also have to make the case for that with our administrations and with our donors.
I would add one thing, and that is that a kind of burnout is a possibility. The woman who handles our academic outreach right now, we're at our maximum of how many hours we can have people in, and I'm trying to encourage her to recognize the faculty members who are not, it's not just a one-off, but develop long-standing relationships so that they're sustainable on both sides and it's mutually enhancing over time.
Time for one more question. There's someone here.
Okay.
Gee. You've been waiting a long time, so.
I realized it'd be the last one. Elizabeth Rodini from Johns Hopkins University, and I wanted to raise a topic that I've heard mentioned, I believe, once in this conference, and that was by Julie McLean from Smith College, and that is the topic of conservation. And what I'm curious about, and actually this is sort of an information gathering question, so if not the panelists, but any of you here have thoughts that might pertain, I would love you to email me, erodini@jhu.edu, on how to engage conservators in this project, because I think we're talking about object-based learning, but we haven't heard anything about the people that really work on those objects. We increasingly see in history of art a field that we call technical art history, in which conservators and art historians are working together actively to learn new things about objects. And I think also, to go back to the topic that I was asked to address a couple days ago, if we want to think about interdisciplinarity, conservation is a place where we can start bringing in people from the sciences. I'm working hard to bring material scientists from our engineering program into some of the work we're doing. So I'm curious about how conservation fits into or could fit into what you're doing. Again, I would love to hear from other people about this, about how that can be more part of the art museum endeavor.
I actually would like to respond to that because we are, I have a situation where our chemistry, the chair of the chemistry department, Cass Parker, last year came to me about fashioning, constructing a class where his students would come into the galleries and observe in some scientific way the condition of some of the molecules of, I don't remember the exact language, but he was very clear about what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it. And there was a grant that he was trying to put together, and he wanted to confirm that I would give him, that we would give the students access to these works. And then also the art department chair, Christopher Hickey, was going to be involved in that. Long story short, we met several times, and then all of a sudden we didn't hear any more from him. And I later found out that he decided that it wasn't enough time to meet his deadline because, well, what I had told him that I thought he needed to do, he needed to converse with the conservation person that I gave him, Larry Schutz, up down in Atlanta, because he would have the information that would be needed for these students to be able to, he would be able to provide a framework in terms of what he needed to do, within the chemistry aspect. And apparently he didn't have the time. But what was interesting to me was that when he came to me years ago during the To Conserve a Legacy project under Jock, I had, conducted some seminars and invited all the faculty members to have this exact discussion. And so when he came back to me, he was like, well, I know you tried to get us to do this back in 2000. He says, and I just didn't really get it at that time, but apparently he was someplace else and heard about it and decided he wanted to pursue it. But I was glad to at least know that he acknowledged that he heard it. at home first. In talking with him before I left last week, he said he's going to, he's looking at the calendar again, and they're starting in time enough to really set that up. So that's how we're going about that.
I'd also like to just make a comment about that because it's something we're thinking a lot about as a smallish college, not a major research university. We have kind of limited resources for pulling this together, but we have a really active interest, which we've been nurturing in our students. And we've now got quite a track record of students leaving Smith and going on to training in art conservation with a number of leaders in the field. So we take seriously trying to build these bridges with the sciences and at least create those opportunities for students. And we've been taking small steps, but I think pointing in a good direction. We have a long-standing partnership with the chemistry department, and their chemistry course for non-majors is actually a museum-based course called the Chemistry of Art Objects, and it's taught by a chemist on the faculty, but out of our collection in partnership with a member of our staff. And then building on that, the science department recently established a technical art materials lab within the science spaces, and we are now sponsoring a course that's taught in that space on artist methods and materials, a kind of a foundational course for people with an interest in art conservation. So those are both exciting developments, and we've found that the field of conservation science is an incredibly willing partner because this idea of technical art history is a relatively new one. And so we hosted an international conference about 5 years ago and had just an unbelievable spectrum of speakers come to campus. And then we've sponsored some lectures on the topic. Most recently, Keith Christensen and Michael Gallagher from the Met came and gave just a fantastic talk about their collaboration. So we're, in small ways, we're trying to kind of mine that same vein and surface those issues for our students.
Yeah. I think all of you know that there's the whole Williamstown Art Conservation Center, which is the home to, 56 member institutions in New England, and that was the institution we collaborated with on the Conserve a Legacy American Art from Historically Black Colleges and Universities years ago. It was a 5-year project, but that's how Tina and I met, with 6 HBCUs, the Studio Museum of Harlem, the lab, and then a whole group of, student interns from those colleges who literally were paid to work at the labs and museums and then go back to their own institutions. There's some wonderful models of things I think all of us have tried and are worth sharing some more. And I want to just echo what Jessica's saying, is I think many of us are starting to participate more in this field of technical art history. Ian McClure is actually collaborating with his colleagues at NYU, and we're sponsoring at Yale now the last summer and this summer, and I think it's going to go on probably with about a 6-year commitment, perhaps from CRES, to fund that, and that's for faculty members who want to learn more about this and can apply from all over the place to come to that program. For any of you, I think also would be welcome to apply for such a program. So look into it, and if you have colleagues in your own institutions who are faculty members you think would benefit, we hosted the program last summer, and I think there are about 16 or so faculty members or educators who are picked to participated in it each year.
I can just add that there is actually a website for that project for anybody who's interested. It's a Summerly Institute. As Jock has mentioned, it's 1 week each summer, and it will continue for the next 6 years. It's called the Summer Technical Art History Institute. It's sponsored by CRES, and you can find it under any of those keyword searches.
Wonderful. Oh. Right there. Well, thank you, everyone. It's time to wrap this up, and I think it's just been an extraordinary 3-day event. One of the things that, and before I say that, I should really thank John, Tina, Jessica, Jock, and Sylvia for their wonderful comments this morning, and for all of your questions. That was a very fruitful discussion. And one of the things that struck me during this was during David Helfand's remarks, and he's someone who, like Jock, turned down tenure. He was offered tenure at Columbia University, and he just didn't believe in that system. And so he founded Quest University with really this idea of transforming higher education and learning centers. And he was calling for a non-hierarchical and interdisciplinary institution that hadn't yet been made. And it made me think, during his remarks, all of the things he was looking for in that institution are really embodied, deeply embodied in teaching museums. we are non-hierarchical, we are interdisciplinary at our core. We are participatory, we are collaborative, we are collegial. We've seen all that today and beyond. We are innovative, we are catalysts for change, we are flexible, we take risks, we're not afraid of failure, and we teach creativity, we teach critical thinking, we celebrate the imagination, we teach close observational skills, we are nimble, we're much less bureaucratic than larger civic museums. We're not driven by attendance or by mission drift. And I think, above all, we really have to realize that this is our moment, and we have to seize these opportunities and articulate our message. And I do agree with you about the anecdote, the power of the anecdote and the story. We are storytellers, and telling that story is very important to us. I really believe our best work is in front of us. And I think that, you know, we do have to go from here and take advantage of everything that we've learned. And to go back to Tina's point, we have to be leopards. We have to be fearless. And that's how we're going to capitalize on this unique opportunity that we've been given. So it's a very exciting time in this field. I think that's been palpable during this time. And you know, Jessica, I think you're right to remind us about the challenges, the resources. I live in fear of a student ever saying to me that the museum is a nice place for their parents to visit when they're on campus, or a faculty member to say, you know, I've heard you have a collection, could I have a work in my office? And you say, no, it's used for teaching, and they're like, oh, you teach? You do that? You know, those are my nightmares. But I think that when we're really fully functioning as we are now, and when we're getting our message out, you know, this is going to be a great moment in our history. It's a pivotal time in our history. And I want to thank you all for coming and for making this happen. It's been a great event. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Great to meet you.